My name is Eleanor Blackwood, though I've come to think of names as merely costumes we wear, easily shed when they no longer serve their purpose. I tell you this now, at the beginning, because by the end of this story, you'll understand why identity itself became my most potent weapon. I am 34 years old, an architect by training, though I haven't drawn a blueprint in 3 years. Instead, I've spent that time constructing something far more intricate than any building. A careful, methodical plan that would reshape the lives of those who thought they could destroy mine with impunity. Architecture taught me that the most beautiful structures require patience, precision, and an understanding of how weight and pressure distribute across every beam and joint. Revenge, I discovered, follows remarkably similar principles. Before I tell you what they did to me, let me tell you who I was. I grew up in a modest suburb of Chicago, the daughter of a high school mathematics teacher and a nurse. Mine was a childhood of quiet ambition, of libraries and late-night studying, of parents who believed that education and hard work could elevate anyone. I inherited my mother's keen observation skills. She could diagnose a patient's condition from subtle cues others missed, and my father's love of patterns and systems. These gifts would serve me well in ways I never imagined. I met Marcus Blackwood during my final year at Northwestern. He was everything I thought I wanted: brilliant, ambitious, from an old Boston family with the kind of wealth that whispered rather than shouted. His charm was like expensive cologne, subtle but intoxicating once you noticed it. He pursued me with the dedication of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted, and I, despite my intelligence, mistook persistence for devotion. We married 2 years after graduation. I was 25, working at a prestigious firm downtown, designing homes for people whose monthly landscaping budgets exceeded my parents' annual income. Marcus had joined his family's investment firm, following a path laid out for him since birth. Our wedding was featured in the society pages, the middle-class girl who'd captured the heart of Boston nobility. How naive I was to think it was my heart that mattered. For 5 years, I believed I was living a fairy tale. We had a brownstone in Lincoln Park, dinner parties with interesting people, annual trips to Europe. I designed our home with meticulous care, creating spaces that reflected what I thought was our shared life. Every room told a story of us, or so I believed. Marcus's study, with its mahogany panels and hidden compartments for his rare whiskey collection. The library where we'd spend Sunday mornings, him reading the financial news while I sketched. The bedroom with its custom-built window seat, where I'd curl up during his increasingly frequent business trips. I noticed the changes slowly, the way you notice paint beginning to crack on a ceiling. Insignificant at first, then impossible to ignore. Business trips that extended without explanation. Phone calls taken in his study with the door locked. The way his sister Victoria, who'd never quite warmed to me, began looking at me with something that might have been pity. The revelation came on a Tuesday in November, 3 years ago. I'd left work early with a migraine, one of those crushing headaches that had begun plaguing me with increasing frequency. I entered our home expecting silence, planning to draw the curtains and sleep off the pain. Instead, I heard voices from upstairs, Marcus's low murmur and a woman's laugh, bright and cruel as breaking glass. I should have confronted them immediately. Should have stormed upstairs, thrown open the bedroom door, created the kind of scene that would have given me the moral high ground. Instead, I stood frozen in my own foyer, my hand still on the doorknob, listening to the sounds of my life shattering. Some part of me, the part that would later prove most useful, was already calculating, already understanding that knowledge kept secret is power retained. I left as quietly as I'd entered, drove to a coffee shop and sat there for 3 hours, my untouched latte growing cold as I stared at my wedding ring. The barista, a young woman with kind eyes and multiple piercings, asked if I was all right. I told her I was fine, and in a strange way I was. The migraine had vanished, replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like breathing pure oxygen. That evening, I returned home at my usual time. Marcus kissed my cheek, asked about my day, complained about a difficult client. I made dinner salmon with dill, his favorite, and listened to him talk, studying him with the detachment of an anthropologist, observing an unknown species. This man I'd shared my bed with for 7 years had become a stranger, or perhaps I was finally seeing the stranger he'd always been. The woman was Cassandra Chen, a name I'd heard mentioned at parties. She worked at a competing investment firm, was known for her ruthless ambition and her collection of married lovers. The affair, I would later learn, had been going on for 8 months. But that discovery, and the deeper betrayals it would reveal, came later. That night, I simply watched my husband eat his salmon and lie about his day, and felt something cold and patient take root in my chest. I spent the next 2 months gathering information with the methodical precision I'd once applied to architectural surveys. I installed a tracking app on Marcus's phone during one of his showers, learned the passwords to his various accounts, documented every late night and weekend conference. I discovered that Cassandra was merely the latest in a series of affairs, stretching back years. The business trips to New York had been spent in a Soho apartment he'd purchased. Our joint funds, I noted, for his private meeting. But the affairs, devastating as they were, paled beside the financial betrayal I uncovered. Marcus had been slowly, systematically moving assets from our joint holdings into offshore accounts. The family trust his grandmother had left partly in my name had been drained through a series of complex transactions. He'd remortgaged our brownstone without my knowledge. Forgery, I realized, though proving it would be difficult. He was preparing to leave me, not just emotionally, but financially destitute. I sat in my office one evening, spreadsheets of his deceptions glowing on my screen, and understood the full scope of his plan. He would wait until the transfers were complete, perhaps another year, then file for divorce. He'd claimed the brownstone was over-leveraged due to bad investments, that the trust had been spent on my shopping addiction, charges on credit cards I'd never seen for purchases I'd never made. His family's lawyers would ensure I left the marriage with nothing but debt and humiliation. The rage that filled me then was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was cold, calculating, patient, like ice forming slowly over a deep lake. I closed my laptop, poured myself a glass of the expensive Bordeaux we'd been saving for our 10th anniversary, and began to plan. The first thing I did was stop being Eleanor Blackwood, devoted wife. Oh, I maintained the facade, continued making his favorite meals, attending his corporate events, playing the role of the supportive spouse. But behind that mask, I became someone else entirely. I opened bank accounts under my maiden name, Elena Marquez, at small credit unions across the city. I began freelancing, taking on projects Marcus knew nothing about, building a financial foundation he couldn't touch. I studied Marcus and Cassandra with the intensity of a chess grandmaster analyzing opponents. Cassandra, I learned, had ambitions beyond being a mistress. She wanted Marcus's connections, his family's influence, the doors that the Blackwood name could open. She was also engaged to David Liu, a tech entrepreneur who traveled frequently to Asia. David believed Cassandra was working late those nights she spent in Marcus's Soho apartment. Victoria, Marcus's sister, proved an interesting study. She'd always treated me with cool disdain, viewing me as an interloper in their rarefied world. But Victoria had her own secrets. Her perfect marriage to Harrison Pike, a senator's son, was propped up by prescription pills, and his preference for escorts who looked nothing like his ice-blonde wife. She was also embezzling from the charity she chaired, skimming donations meant for underprivileged children to fund her shopping addiction. I documented everything, every affair, every financial transaction, every crime, small and large. I became a ghost in my own life, present but invisible, gathering the threads that would eventually weave into their destruction. The plan took shape slowly, the way a building rises from foundation to frame to finished structure. I couldn't simply expose them. That would be too crude, too obvious, too merciful. Instead, I would architect their downfall so perfectly that they would destroy themselves, believing all the while that they were in control. I started with whisper anonymous tips to the right people, breadcrumbs that led nowhere immediately but planted seeds of doubt. A message to David Liu's assistant about Cassandra's client dinners that ran unusually late. A donation to Victoria's charity made in cash, with a note suggesting someone should look into where the money really went. Small things, easily dismissed, but creating hairline cracks in their perfect facades. Then I began phase 2, infiltration. I hired a private investigator, not to gather information, I had plenty, but to be seen gathering it. Luis Mendez was a former cop with a reputation for discretion, and a face people remember. I had him follow Cassandra just obviously enough that she'd notice. Just subtly enough that she couldn't be certain. Paranoia, I'd learned, was more destructive than any direct attack. I befriended David Liu's sister, Michelle, at a yoga class I knew she attended. We bonded over green juice and gossip, and I carefully let slip after swearing her to secrecy that I'd heard rumors about Cassandra and a married man. Michelle, loyal to her brother but constitutionally unable to keep secrets, wrestled with the information for exactly 4 days before confronting David. Meanwhile, I orchestrated encounters between Marcus and Harrison Pike at their club. Harrison, insecure and perpetually jealous, noticed how Marcus's eyes lingered on certain waitresses. I made sure those waitresses, actresses I'd hired, flirted just enough to be noticed. Seeds of suspicion between conspirators are particularly fertile. The financial component required more finesse. I couldn't simply steal back what Marcus had taken. That would make me as culpable as him. Instead, I became a whistleblower. Using the anonymous tip lines the SEC provides, I reported suspicious trading patterns in Marcus's account. The trades themselves were legal, but the timing suggested insider information. I knew the investigation would take months, possibly years, but I also knew that once started, it would uncover the asset transfers, the offshore accounts, the forged document. For Victoria's charity, I took a different approach. I made a substantial donation in honor of my late grandmother, a woman who'd actually died when I was 12 but who I now resurrected as a recent loss. I insisted on being involved in the charity's planning committee, claiming it helped with my grief. Victoria couldn't refuse without seeming heartless. Once inside, I volunteered for the thankless task of organizing receipts and documentation. Within weeks, I'd created a paper trail so convoluted that when the audit came, and I would ensure it came, Victoria's embezzlement would be obvious, but proving her innocence would be impossible. The beauty of the plan was its interconnectedness. As each person began to feel the pressure, they turned on each other. Marcus, stressed by the SEC investigation, became careless with Cassandra. She, feeling David's suspicion and seeing Marcus as a liability rather than an asset, began distancing herself. This made Marcus desperate, which made him sloppy. He started drinking more, staying out later. One night he came home with lipstick on his collar. Not Cassandra's shade, I noticed. He was seeking comfort elsewhere, spreading his vulnerabilities even wider. I played the concerned wife, suggesting he was working too hard, that maybe he should talk to someone. The therapist I recommended was legitimate, but known for encouraging patients to speak their truth. Marcus, narcissist that he was, couldn't resist the opportunity to talk about himself for 50 minutes twice a week. Harrison Pike, meanwhile, had hired his own investigator to follow Marcus. The investigator, through sheer coincidence, or perhaps because I'd leaked Marcus's schedule, photographed him leaving a hotel with one of Harrison's favorite escorts. Harrison, not knowing Marcus had no idea of the woman's profession, assumed it was a deliberate provocation. The dominoes began falling faster than even I had anticipated. David Liu confronted Cassandra about the affair. She denied it, but her phone records, which David's tech connections easily accessed, told a different story. Their engagement ended in a spectacular scene at a charity gala, complete with thrown champagne and witnesses from every major firm in the city. Cassandra, her reputation in tatters, tried to salvage things with Marcus, but Marcus was dealing with his own crisis. The SEC investigation had triggered an internal audit at his firm. The offshore accounts, while technically legal, violated company policy. He was given a choice: resign quietly or face public termination. Victoria's situation unraveled when a junior committee member, idealistic and unaware of how things usually worked, noticed discrepancies in the charity's books. She brought them to the board's attention, CCing me on the email out of courtesy. I expressed shock, suggested we hire an external auditor to clear up what was surely a misunderstanding. Victoria couldn't object without seeming guilty. As the pressure mounted on all fronts, Marcus became a different man. The confident, charming person I'd married was replaced by someone paranoid and volatile. He accused me of spying on him, of sabotaging his career. I responded with hurt confusion, the perfect victim. When his drinking worsened, I suggested rehab. When he refused, I started attending Al-Anon meetings, establishing a pattern of trying to help my troubled husband. The end came swiftly. Harrison Pike, enraged by what he saw as Marcus's betrayal, went to the senior partners at Marcus's firm with evidence of the escort. Evidence that, while circumstantial, looked damning when combined with the SEC investigation and internal audit. Marcus was forced to resign immediately. Without his job, Marcus couldn't maintain the payments on his various schemes. The Soho apartment went into foreclosure. The offshore accounts, frozen by investigators, became useless. The credit cards he'd opened in my name came due, but I had documentation proving I'd never signed for them. Cassandra, desperate to salvage her career, claimed Marcus had coerced her into the affair, that he'd promised to use his influence to advance her position. Some believed her, some didn't, but her reputation was irreparably damaged. She left for a position in London, a lateral move that everyone recognized as exile. Victoria's charity quietly asked her to step down, pending the results of the audit. Harrison, humiliated by the escort scandal and his wife's legal troubles, filed for divorce. Their perfect life, built on lies and other people's money, crumbled like poor concrete. Through it all, I remained the supportive wife, shocked by each revelation, standing by my husband even as evidence of his betrayals mounted. When I finally filed for divorce, citing emotional abuse and financial malfeasance, I had the sympathy of everyone who mattered. Marcus's own lawyer, seeing the documented evidence of forgery and asset theft, advised him to settle quickly and quietly. The settlement gave me everything: the brownstone, the legitimate investments, even the car Marcus had bought for Cassandra, but never transferred out of our joint ownership. More importantly, it gave me vindication. The woman they'd tried to destroy, to leave with nothing, now had everything they'd valued, but the material victories felt hollow compared to the psychological ones. Marcus, stripped of his family's support after the scandals, moved to a studio apartment in Bridgeport. He'd kept his license, but couldn't find work at any reputable firm. The last I heard, he was doing freelance consulting for cryptocurrency startups, a far cry from the master of the universe he'd once believed himself to be. I kept tabs on all of them, not from vindictiveness, but from a need to see the complete arc of justice. Cassandra managed to rebuild partially in London, but the Whisper network ensured she'd never reach the heights she'd aimed for. Victoria and Harrison's divorce was acrimonious and public. Their dirty laundry aired in court documents that made the society pages. She lost access to the family trust, and without Harrison's connections or the charity's platform, she became just another divorced woman, approaching 40 with expensive tastes and no way to fund them. The investigation into Marcus's firm expanded, uncovering a culture of misconduct that led to multiple resignations and a significant settlement with the SEC. I watched from afar as the institution that had protected him, that had given him the power to hurt me, was itself dissected and punished. There were casualties I hadn't intended. David Liu, innocent of everything but loving the wrong woman, had his startup damaged by association with the scandal. I anonymously invested in his company, enough to keep it afloat. My single act of restitution. The escorts Harrison frequented found themselves questioned by investigators, their livelihoods threatened by exposure. I arranged through intermediaries for legal representation and financial support. They were blameless in this war. 3 years have passed since I discovered Marcus in our bedroom with Cassandra. I still live in the brownstone, though I've redesigned every room, exorcising the ghosts of our false life together. I've returned to architecture, but now I specialize in rebuilding, taking structures damaged by neglect or disaster and making them whole again. There's poetry in that, I suppose. I date occasionally, but trust comes hard. I see the fault lines in people now, the places where they might crack under pressure. It's a useful skill, but a lonely one. My therapist, a real one, not the performance I gave at Al-Anon, tells me I need to forgive, not for them but for myself. Perhaps she's right. Perhaps one day I'll feel something other than cold satisfaction when I think of what I did. But not today. Today I sit in my window seat, the one I built for quiet Sunday mornings that never came, and I feel only the architect's pleasure in a well-executed plan. They thought they could build their happiness on the ruins of my life. They forgot that I understood construction, that I knew how to find the load-bearing walls and remove them one by one. Some would say revenge consumed 3 years of my life. I prefer to think of it as an education. I learned that justice isn't given, it's taken. I learned that the powerful protect each other until it's no longer profitable. Most importantly, I learned that the most elaborate structures can be brought down by the smallest cracks if you know where to apply pressure. The other day, I received a wedding invitation from Michelle Liu. She's marrying a doctor, someone kind and uncomplicated,
In her handwritten note, she thanked me for being a friend during a difficult time, for helping her see the truth about Cassandra before her brother was hurt worse. She has no idea how carefully orchestrated that friendship was, how deliberately I'd placed the information that saved her brother. To her, I'm simply Eleanor, the woman from yoga, who became a confidant. I'll attend the wedding, I'll give an appropriate gift, make small talk at the reception, dance if asked. I'll play the role of Eleanor Blackwood, divorcee but not victim, professional but approachable. It's a comfortable character now, one I've worn so long it almost feels real. But late at night, when the city is quiet and I'm alone with my thoughts, I remember who I really am, and the woman who was underestimated, who was marked for destruction, who refused to go quietly, and the architect of my own salvation and their downfall. I'm Elena Marquez, who became Eleanor Blackwood, who became something else entirely, someone capable of patience, planning, and perfect execution. Would I do it again? The question haunts me sometimes. If I could go back to that November afternoon, would I confront them immediately, take the high road of righteous anger and quick divorce? Would I spare myself the 3 years of careful deception, of becoming someone I'm not sure I like? The answer, uncomfortable as it is no. Because in those 3 years, I didn't just destroy them. I discovered myself. I found capabilities I didn't know I possessed. Strength that comes not from anger, but from cold determination. I learned that nice girls don't finish last, they simply play a longer game. Marcus sent me a letter last month. His handwriting, once so confident, now wavered across the page. He apologized for the affairs, the financial deception, the attempt to leave me with nothing. He said therapy had helped him understand his narcissism, his need to control and possess. He hoped I could forgive him, hoped we could find closure.
I read the letter 3 times, then burned it in the fireplace I'd had installed, where his study used to be. Forgiveness, I've decided, is a luxury I can't afford. Not because I'm still angry, that emotion burned out long ago, but because forgiveness would require me to forget the lessons I learned. I know things now that I wish I didn't. I know how easily love becomes contempt, how trust can be weaponized, how the person sharing your bed can be planning your destruction. But I also know my own power. I know that when pushed to the edge, I don't fall. I push back with calculated precision. The nightmares have mostly stopped. For months after everything concluded, I would wake in cold sweats, dreaming not of what was done to me, but of what I had done in return. My subconscious, apparently more conventionally moral than my waking mind, struggled with the magnitude of my revenge. But even my dreams have accepted the truth now. They deserved what they got. I've made peace with the person I've become. She's harder than the woman who married Marcus. Less trusting, more calculating, but she's also stronger, more self-reliant, infinitely more capable. Eleanor Blackwood, the architect, was talented but naive. The woman I am now builds with full knowledge of how easily structures can fall, and ensures hers never will. Sometimes I walk past the building where Marcus's firm used to have its offices. They've relocated, downsized after the investigations and settlements. The space is being renovated, turned into luxury condos. I've heard through professional channels that they're looking for an architect to reimagine the interior. Part of me is tempted to submit a proposal, to transform the space where so much corruption festered into something beautiful and honest. But that would be too on the nose, even for me. Instead, I focus on my current project, a women's shelter, expanding into a job training center. It's meaningful work, helping women rebuild lives shattered by the men they trusted. I donate my services, considering it a form of balance for the destruction I caused. The director, Sister Catherine, tells me I have a gift for understanding what broken people need to feel whole again. If only she knew how I acquired that understanding. My parents visit occasionally. They never fully understood what happened to my marriage. I gave them a sanitized version involving infidelity and irreconcilable differences. My mother, with her nurse's instinct, senses there's more to the story, but respects my privacy. My father just seems relieved I'm financially secure and professionally successful. They worry I'm alone too much, hint about grandchildren they'll likely never have. I let them worry. It's a small price for maintaining their innocence about what their daughter is capable of. I've thought about writing this story down properly, turning it into one of those revenge novels that sell well in airport bookstores. But fiction requires heroes and villains, clear moral lines and redemptive arcs. My story has none of those. We were all villains in the end, all of us broken by our choices. The only difference is that I chose my breaking deliberately, shaped it to my purpose. The city looks different from my window now. Where once I saw buildings as static things, permanent and unchanging, now I see the constant tension between creation and entropy. Every structure, no matter how solid it appears, is in a constant state of decay and renewal. The trick is knowing which process to accelerate. I've become something of an expert in controlled demolition, not of buildings, but of lives built on false foundations. It's not a skill I advertise, but sometimes at parties or professional gatherings, someone will approach me quietly. They'll tell me about a business partner who's stealing, a spouse who's gaslighting them, a family member who's systematically destroying their life. They've heard whispers, they say, about what happened to Marcus and the others. They wonder if I might have advice. I always decline to help directly. What I did was specific to my situation, born of particular circumstances and desperate need. But I do offer them something, permission to stop being victims. I tell them that the high road is a luxury for those who haven't been truly betrayed, that sometimes justice requires getting your hands dirty. Most leave looking scandalized, but a few, the ones with that cold fire in their eyes that I recognize from my own mirror, they understand. One woman, Sarah, came to me 6 months ago. Her business partner had stolen her revolutionary design software, patented it under his name while she was recovering from cancer treatment. The legal route would take years and bankrupt her. She wanted to know how I'd survived my ordeal. I told her about patience, about documentation, about understanding your enemy better than they understand themselves. I didn't tell her what to do. That would make me complicit. But I did mention, casually, that her partner had a gambling problem and a wife who didn't know about it. What Sarah did with that information was her choice. Last I heard, she'd regained control of her company, and her partner was in rehab, his marriage intact, but conditional on his continued treatment. Sometimes the best revenge is forcing someone to confront themselves. These consultations, informal as they are, have become a strange sort of therapy. Each person who comes to me thinking they're weak leaves understanding their own power. It doesn't absolve me of what I did, but it transforms the knowledge into something useful. Marcus's mother called me last week. Eleanor Sr., as she insisted everyone call her, had maintained dignified silence throughout the scandals, but time and loneliness had worn down her reserve. She wanted to see me, to understand what had happened to her golden son. I met her for tea at the Drake, neutral territory heavy with old Chicago money. She looked older, diminished, the kind of aging that comes from disappointment rather than years. She asked with the directness that wealth permits what I had done to Marcus. I could have lied, played the innocent victim one more time. Instead, I told her the truth. Not all of it, but enough. I explained what Marcus had planned, how systematically he'd tried to destroy me. I showed her documents, evidence of forgeries and theft. I watched her face crumble as she realized her son was not the victim, but the architect of his own downfall. She asked if I'd orchestrated his destruction in return. I met her eyes, the same cold blue as Marcus's, and said yes, not all of it, but enough. She could have raged, threatened, used her remaining influence against me. Instead, she nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd always suspected. Before she left, she pressed an envelope into my hand. Inside was a check for the exact amount Marcus had stolen from the trust, along with a note, for what should have been yours. It wasn't an apology. Women like Eleanor Sr. don't apologize, but it was an acknowledgement. The matriarch had chosen sides, and she'd chosen the survivor. I donated the money to Sister Catherine's shelter. Blood money, even when freely given, carries a taint I don't want in my life, but it will help women escape situations like mine before they require the extreme measures I took. There's balance in that, or at least the illusion of. People sometimes ask if I'm happy now. It's a strange question, presupposing that happiness is the goal. I'm not happy in the way I was at 25, full of hope and trust, and naive optimism. That kind of happiness requires an innocence I can't reclaim, but I am satisfied. I wake each morning in a bed I chose, in a home I've rebuilt, to work I find meaningful. I answer to no one. Trust carefully, but not foolishly, and never forget that the person in the mirror is capable of both great creation and terrible destruction. If that's not happiness, it's at least a form of peace. The revenge I took wasn't just about punishment. It was about reclamation of my assets. Yes, but more importantly of my agency. They tried to write my ending, to close my story with debt and humiliation. Instead, I became the author, crafting a conclusion where justice, however brutal, was served. Would a better person have taken the high road? Probably. Would a stronger person have simply walked away and rebuilt elsewhere? Perhaps. But I was neither better nor stronger. I was simply determined not to be destroyed by those who claimed to love me. The brownstone is quiet tonight. I've turned Marcus's old study into a library, filling it with architecture books and mystery novels, structures and their deliberate destruction. The window seat where I first began planning now holds cushions I've embroidered myself, learning the patience of needle and thread. Every room tells a new story, one where I'm both protagonist and narrator. Tomorrow, I have meetings with clients who want to restore a vintage apartment building. They don't know that I understand destruction as well as creation, that I can see the weak points in any structure, physical or personal. They just know I have a reputation for bringing dead buildings back to life. I'll help them. I'll design something beautiful and lasting, something that will shelter families and create homes. It's what I do now, build instead of destroy. But the knowledge remains. The skills I developed during those 3 dark years, they're like tools in a locked drawer, unnecessary now, but available if ever needed again. Some would call me a monster for what I did. They're not entirely wrong. I became monstrous, matching the cruelty shown to me with interest. But monsters, I've learned, are often just people pushed past their breaking point, who choose to break others instead of themselves. The clock strikes midnight. In a few hours, the sun will rise over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in shades of redemption. I'll make coffee in the kitchen I redesigned, read the news in the breakfast nook that used to be Marcus's wine storage, and prepare for another day of building and living. This is my story, not one of simple revenge, but of transformation. I entered that game as a victim, and emerged as something else entirely. Whether that's a cautionary tale or an inspiration depends, I suppose, on which side of betrayal you stand. I am Eleanor Blackwood, architect of buildings and life. I am Elena Marquez, who remembers what it means to be powerless. I am someone else too, someone born from necessity and carved from cold fury, someone I hope never to meet again, but will never fully abandon. They thought they could bury me. They didn't realize I was a seed, waiting for the right conditions to grow into something thorny and unforgiving. Now I bloom in my own garden, tending what I choose to cultivate, pruning what no longer serves. The champagne I'm drinking tonight is from Marcus's collection, a bottle he was saving for a special occasion. Every sip tastes of victory and vindication. When it's gone, I'll open another, and another until every trace of him is consumed and transformed into my own celebration. This is how I won, not just by destroying them, but by surviving myself, by becoming someone capable of such calculated devastation, and then choosing to stop. The greatest revenge, perhaps, is living well in the ruins of their expectations. I am the architect of my own salvation. I am the author of their downfall. I am finally and completely free. And that, more than all the assets recovered or justice served, is the true measure of my victory. Have you ever trusted someone so completely, only to watch them turn that trust into a weapon? Have you ever been broken and had to rebuild yourself from the ground up, piece by calculated piece? If my story echoed something in you, if you've seen the cracks behind the smile of someone who claimed to love you, then maybe you understand why I did what I did. Let me know in the comments if you've ever faced a betrayal you couldn't forget, and if you believe in rising stronger from the ruins, like I did, like this video. Subscribe to the channel, because there are more stories like mine, stories of survival, of strategy, of revenge, and maybe, just maybe, they'll remind you that you're not alone.